well on those. But we start a new chapter today. It's Reconstruction, chapter 15. And we're going to really start moving along fairly rapidly. But Reconstruction, basically the period after the Civil War, it ended in 1877, so about 12 years of Reconstruction. So you'll need to know that term, another term, freedman. And self-explanatory, freedman was a freed man, freed woman, one of the slaves that was now free. And the thing you've got to understand the most about Reconstruction, to the north, it was nothing, pretty much. I mean, where did the fighting in the north take place? Very few places. The biggest one, Gettysburg. In the south, it was all over the place. And when you think about the different elements that the South had to deal with, first of all, a lot of their buildings were destroyed. When you think about Sherman's March to the Sea, when you think of Atlanta and Richmond and other cities that were totally destroyed, wiped out, that caused a problem for the South. They lost a lot of their major financial places. The other thing that took place, a lot of their fields were destroyed. A lot of their cows and chickens were gone. Pigs were gone. When the North would come through, the soldiers would come through, they would confiscate those. They would eat them. And so they were gone. The other thing that took place, think about the labor force. We've talked about this over and over, almost ad nauseum, that the slaves were a large chunk of the labor force in the South. Now there are no more slaves. So your whole economy has pretty much been wiped out. The other thing that really made the South hurt was their money. They had converted to Confederate bills, and we talked about this before spring break, that toward the end of the war, I mean, you could buy a stick of gum with 1,000 Confederate dollars. Very, very low value. Now the war's over. You've got all this Confederate money, but you have very little U.S. currency. What do? You don't have money. So therefore, that was another problem. One thing that was interesting about the Civil War is after it was over, a couple of things happened. I mentioned Andersonville Prison in Georgia. Terrible, terrible prisoner of war camp for Northern soldiers in Georgia. The head of that prison camp was executed. Jefferson Davis was locked up in prison for a while, but they released him. He never had a trial. Other than that, you would think that after all these states had left the Union, that there would be some kind of repercussions, some kind of hanging, some kind of trial, some kind of financial penalty. But no, there was not. It was weird in that sense that we wanted the Union back together. The North wanted the Union back together. Now, the problem is, how do you do that? How are they going to put it back in? Is it going to be easy? Is it going to be hard? Another thing to think about in the South, the state governments were destroyed. Most of them were Confederate-led, and after the Civil War, I mean, it was just, it kind of blew out. You'll see on page 300, so the chapter starts on 299. On page 300, excuse me, it's not Corona, but anyway, you'll see the phases of Reconstruction. There were 3 phases of Reconstruction: presidential Reconstruction, congressional Reconstruction, and Redeemers Reconstruction. So you will see those on page 300. We'll start with presidential Reconstruction today. And as I mentioned, Lincoln basically wanted to bring the South back in. Didn't want to cause a lot of pain for them. Wanted to make it as quickly and as easy, such an easy transition that it would be done quickly and America could get back about its own business. He devised a Lincoln plan, the presidential Reconstruction, the Lincoln plan. Basically, he said that if 10% of a state would pledge their allegiance to the Union, 10% of people that were registered in 1860, if 10% would do that, you could come back in as a state. But you had a group that did not like that. They were the radical Republicans. And we'll talk about them more in depth in just a minute. But their main fear was that, hey, you remember that slaves did not count as a full individual. We talked about that when we formed the Constitution. Well, now they're going to count as one person. So what's going to happen to the representation of the South? It's skyrocketed. And so they're going to have more representation in the House of Representatives. They're going to be more powerful than ever. And so the radical Republicans wanted to make sure that these Confederates didn't get back in there. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment. The other aspect to the radical Republicans is they wanted Congress to have control. They felt that Abraham Lincoln, during the Civil War, did a lot of things without congressional approval, and he did. And sometimes Congress would go back and they would pass things to bring them up to date that supported the president. But by and large, Lincoln kind of ran rogue. And so the radical Republicans are wanting to rectify that. They want Congress to have the power. Now, one thing they came up with was the Wade-Davis bill. And instead of 10%, like Lincoln had said, they wanted 50%. They also wanted to abolish slavery. They wanted to make sure that the U.S. government did not have to repay any losses to the South, because some of the southern states were wanting that. And Lincoln, basically, it was a pocket veto. He just let it lie. But he vetoed the Wade-Davis bill. Your book talks about Andrew Johnson on page 301, and I've got a video attached in just a minute. I find this fascinating. I love going to this place. I've been a couple of times, and if you get the opportunity, go to Mooresville, Alabama. If you go from Huntsville to Decatur on the interstate there, it's exit 2, I believe, right before you exit to either go to I-65 or go to Highway 20 on into Decatur. So it's not a far drive. But Mooresville, Alabama, the oldest incorporated town in the state of Alabama. Andrew Johnson actually lived there for a time. He was an apprentice for a tailor. Andrew Johnson was not a well-educated man. His wife taught him how to read and how to write. He met her in Greenville, Tennessee, and he was serving at a tailor shop there. The tailor was not a good one by any stretch, but there are ties with Andrew Johnson, who of course is from Tennessee, to Alabama, Mooresville, Alabama. So check it out if you get a chance. And there is attached a little 2.5-minute video. And I don't know who Jesse is, but it's someone that met them, and they filmed it to capture their experiences. But I wanted you to see some of the buildings. I think it's pretty neat that we have that tied to local history around here. Johnson was one of the few Democrats and one of the few Southerners that were in power, that opposed the South seceding. He voted against Tennessee to secede in 1861. He was the only Southern senator that did not resign his Senate seat during the Civil War, and that's why Lincoln picked him as the vice president. And then Lincoln is shot, and Johnson takes over. And from April until December, Congress was out of session. Congress was not in session near as much as they are now, which was probably a good thing. But during that period, Andrew Johnson was able to pass a lot of things, or do a lot of things that he wanted to do without congressional interference. Here was Johnson's plan. Your book talks about it. He wanted to offer amnesty to Southerners who would swear loyalty to the Union. The only group that he did not want to have amnesty were people that had over $25,000 or $20,000 worth of property. That would have been the large plantation owners, and for them, he wanted them to write him personally, get in contact with him personally, and ask for amnesty. But otherwise, if you pledged allegiance to the Union, then you were granted back in. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. He wanted that to be passed. He wanted Congress to get that done, have the state constitution assemblies where they could get that passed. And when a state had ratified the 13th Amendment, he wanted to allow them to be back in the Union. A couple of states were holdouts. South Carolina said that the federal government owed the states money, and they wanted them to pay it. And also Mississippi did not ratify the 13th Amendment. And here's the other thing. No southern states gave blacks the right to vote. They adopted black codes, and your book talks about that a bunch. But basically, a lot of them said that blacks couldn't live in towns or cities. Not fair at all, but that's what they said. They also said that they could only work as servants or farmers. And you're going to see, and we'll talk about this more, that a lot of former slaves ended up working on either the same plantations they had worked on before, or they worked in similar situations. They did not have credit. They couldn't buy property. And they couldn't, a lot of these black codes said you can't work a trade. So they were pretty much stuck. And it was, again, it was just another form of slavery, only under the guise of, hey, you're free, but here are the repercussions, just like everybody else has repercussions to freedom and limits of freedom. Here are yours. And it was very unfair to the blacks at the time, the freed slaves. Radical Republicans, just a couple of things real quick. They believe that, hey, if we don't give blacks the right to be free, we don't give blacks the right to vote and full rights of citizenship right now, if we can't do it during Reconstruction, when are we going to be able to do it? And we know from history, yes, they were given these rights, but because of poll taxes and different things, some blacks really couldn't vote until the 1960s. So they were right in their thinking there. If we don't do this now, when are we going to ever get this done? They also thought that southern states should not, as we mentioned before, have a lot of power in the United States. And so this is going to cause some more problems, and it's pretty much what's going to drag out Reconstruction, or one of the main issues that's going to drag out Reconstruction. They don't want to yield that power back to the South because they realize what the South did with that power in the first place, and they're afraid if they get in power, well, here we go, they pass laws, and boom, we're back where we were before, square one. The other thing is they didn't think that if you were a former Confederate leader, you were in government before, or you were some higher up in the Confederate government, and now the Confederacy is gone, and you run for office in the United States, they thought that's not right. If you win it, we're not going to seat you. And they actually blocked people who were elected to Congress from taking their seat. What's going to happen is Johnson, and you'll read about this in your book, Andrew Johnson opposed this radicalness. He followed Lincoln's stance that, hey, we need to just gently bring the South back in. And Congress is going to go against Andrew Johnson. And because Andrew Johnson he was different, he wasn't very politically savvy, Andrew Johnson's going to turn a lot of these mainstream Republicans off. He's going to drive them to be radical Republicans. So basically, all of Congress is going to be against him. Later on, that is going to lead to an impeachment. And we're going to see all kinds of stuff in the animosity between Congress and Andrew Johnson. Here's what I want you to do.